Hi, welcome to the Lighthouse Living Room. If you would have known what just happened off camera, you'd probably all be laughing at me too, so that's okay. Hi, we have an interesting, if you will, study tonight. We're talking about blessings and cursing, and we're doing it within the framework of the family. I think I want to first of all make very clear and understand that God has put in place the family. This last Sunday, I was making mention of the fact that how do we know when a politician is not telling the truth? Right now, I think it just depends on how often they open their mouth, because they're not telling you the whole truth or nothing but the truth, because they're telling you what you want to hear so that they can get what they want, which is your vote. But saying all of that to say this is that much of what happens in life focuses around the things that we do as a family. Everything about how you see, or I shouldn't say everything, but 90% of what you see and understand in the real world has everything to do with how you were raised and what the family looks like. I want to share with you a couple of things before we get started in this, because we may not get through this tonight. Next week we may have to go through this again, because we're going to be getting to chapter 4, which is God's blessing through cultural traditions, and that one alone will blow your mind. But there's some thoughts processes that need to be understood in regards to what the Lord had intended for the family. What do we see happening today? And I'm going to give you, I don't know if in this one, I was just going back through my study. Let me see if I can find it real quick just to say I did. No, it's not here in this portion. I was looking at the statistics of how many people and what happens in the world today, at least in the continental United States, and understanding what's happening to the family and how it's being completely destroyed and trying to separate it in every way possible. We saw that with the Black Lives Matter movement, which they have taken off their website, but what they want to do is destroy the nuclear family, and what they mean is that they want the dad out. They don't want a father figure in the family, because that is what God had intended in His Word from day one, is that He wanted to have a family, and that included even God Himself, Jehovah, the Most High. He absolutely wanted a family. And what did that family look like? It started in the garden. It continued through, and finally through Abraham, and all of the things that were going on in regards to what the family looked like and what it meant to him. And finally, we find in Acts when he, in the upper room experience, is where he brought all of his family back together. I've talked about this in the past, talking about the generations that went through all of the pain that they went through, and all he was looking for was to have a family. So part of the family structure and part of what happens in the family is that the father in the way that he, how can I say it? I don't want to say govern, because that's not really the right word, but the way he nurtures the family and creates a family atmosphere is through blessings and through cursing. Now, I know a lot of people won't grasp the cursing part of that, but the things that we do to our children and that happens to our children in the growing up stage is absolutely critical to having the family become whole and viable and absolutely on the right track, if you will. And so the ancient paths, or the old ways, the ways in which God had created from the beginning and the things that He wanted to see happen, should be being continued. And the only way that children can learn them is except through the family structure. Now, in Genesis chapter 12, and if you have your Bible or something to write with, you can write down some of these scriptures that I'm going to give you. And we're going to take a look at some of the Hebrew in regards to what the empowerment meant. A blessing is empowerment. That's what gives people the ability to do what they need to do in growing up and understanding. And some of these words will blow your mind and what they actually mean and why they need to be reinforced in the family structure over and over and over again. Now, in Genesis chapter 12, 1 through 3, it said, the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the ones who curse you, I will curse. And in all of the families of the earth will be blessed. That's the New American Standard Bible. Now, this was a covenant promise which God gave to Abraham, foretelling the coming of the purpose of Jesus, because he's the guy that ushered in what we call the church age, if you will. This is when the family structure, it was so important and so incredibly crucial to the growing up of individuals to become leaders and to become strong in what they do. Now, since the statement was made by God, it's been the business of blessing families ever since. This is a covenant promise. This is something that I believe that we pass down to our children by doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. Now, much of what we see happening today and the things that we see that are going wrong, especially in the big cities, I think I'm a couple of sessions away from talking about some of the things that happen because men have advocated their position. In other words, they think that having a kid makes them a man. Well, the thing is, raising a kid makes you a man. And that's the difference between becoming a man and becoming, just as far as I'm concerned, recreation. And having sex with as many women as you can and all of this other nonsense that we see being taught today in the world, that is normal. And in fact, I was just having a conversation with somebody about the fact that he and this other person, a lady friend of his, have been seeing each other for years and years and years, and that in his words, he said there's certain things that we needed to do, but he's finally figured out that they need to be married. They need to have a contract between each other, that they're going to be faithful to each other, and etc. But my point being is this, is that God's purpose in Jesus was coming to bless the families of the earth. The families of the earth. Now, God is the blesser. The devil is the curser. In other words, everything that God tries to bring into being and bless, the enemy tries to circumvent and destroy. That is just how it is. We need to understand that for him to see a couple come together in the idea that we're going to try this out, which to me is just ludicrous. There is so much going on between two individuals when they come together, and everybody thinks that the coming together is having sexual relations. Well, that's just the start of it. That's only part of it. That only lasts a certain length of time, about 6 months according to science. Science says that the pituitary gland in the back of the skull that takes and excretes this what can I say, that makes the deer stupid during rut when they're trying to mate, that makes the deer nuts and not think about everything. It's the same thing that happens to people. They somehow get together and they have this euphoric feeling for about 6 months, and when the euphoric feeling goes away, they think it's time to discard the one that they're with and go to find another one to get the same feeling back. But that's when the hard work just starts to begin. And that's what a family is actually all about. Now, through Jesus Christ, God's intended in blessing the families of the earth, if you will. And blessing is God's primary mechanism in imparting the message of identity and destiny. We talked about last week. Identity and destiny. Now, how do we do that? Gary Smalley and John Trent wrote a book called The Blessing. If you've not, it's a very old book. In fact, even this study that I'm talking through today is really old. But the fact is that the principles don't change. That's why when I see people who are following trends or fads They find out that at the end of the cycle, the trend or the fad fades away, and what happens, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was talking about, can you not pray with me 1 hour? And that became a big fad for a long, long time. And the guy had some great things to say, but all of a sudden it completely disappeared. And why did that happen? Is because it was a fad. Not that praying's not a good thing. We're doing that here at the Lighthouse. But the point is that you cannot follow a fad. You need to follow principles God has laid out from the foundations of the earth, the planet, and that you follow them so that they are retained. We see that all the way through Scripture. Remember, train up a child in the ways they should go, and when they are old, they will not what? Depart from that. The same is true of some of the other things that I've said in the past, talking about the old paths. Here's a couple of them. He says, there is nothing new under the sun. Nothing. Lamentations talks about that, where he talks about some of the things that summer and winter and spring and fall and all that happens every year. It changes all the time, but it's a constant. It's always the same. That's because God set something in order, and we need to follow it. Now, they define blessings that should come through us or through our parents as containing 5 key elements. I talked about these last week. Now, it's important to understand the meaning of the word blessing. And like I said, Gary Smalley and John Trent wrote a great book called The Blessing. Read it. It's worth the read. Just dig it up, get it on the used bookstore, go to Amazon, do whatever. But the fact that I'm saying that is something you should have in your library, the blessing, to pass it on to those that are under you, people that look up to you. This is something that you give to them as a blessing so that they can retain that. Let's go on. Now, the family blessing includes some interesting things. I like this one, meaningful touch. A lot of people think that touching is not a real thing. But if you put a baby in a bassinet after they're born and not touch them, they will die. It's a fact. They will die. The touch has everything to do with transferring blessing to a baby or an individual. Now, that's number one. Number two, a spoken message. A spoken message. What is a spoken message? That I love you. A spoken message, you have worth. A spoken message, you're a blessing to us. You're not a curse to us. But see, cursing on the other hand, what would the devil say? What would the demonic side say? You're worthless. You have no worth. Why were you born? You have no purpose. You follow where I'm going with this? No. So meaningful touch, spoken message. And how about this? Attaching high value to one being blessed. In other words, no one else can do it. I went to have Chinese food last night. And in the Chinese food, you get the proverbial cookie. And at the end, you break it open and it has a little message in there. He said, there was one in there that was striking to me that, sometimes these guys in think tanks that make up all of these crazy little things that they put in there, sometimes there's a good one. And one of them it says, you have talents, use them. God's given you talents, use them. It's very interesting. And I thought, wow, attaching high value to one being blessed. How about picturing a special future for the one being blessed? God has a plan for your life. Isn't that's powerful? God has a plan for your life. Now, you say that to yourself. God has a plan for my life. This is how we see things. When especially when things are in turmoil or when there's change, a season is changing, and you don't know what's really going on, you don't understand what's happening around you, and you see all of these horrible things going on, and then you can say and you can repeat to yourself, self-affirmation in this way is good. God has a plan for my life. I don't know what it is yet, but I do know there's one there. And an active commitment to fulfill the blessing. In other words, God is in the business of fulfilling that promise to make that become a blessing. Now, here's a thought, and we're going to talk about this for a little bit, and let's take a look at what it means. Now, for our study, the simple definition of blessing is to, listen carefully now, receive, accept, ascribe, which means to assign, high value, to, and consider a person as a success. In other words, I'm going to lift up, a blessing is lifting and bringing people into order that way through blessing. Where does this come from? From the head of the house. Who's the head of the house? The Father. This is why we see in all of these cities, Baltimore, Chicago, all of these different places where there's high crime, is that you will find that the people that are perpetrating the crime are young people who have no father. They'll have a mom at home, they'll have that. And what happens when that mom meets Jesus and understands the value of having Jesus in their life, and they can ascribe Jesus and bring him into the position of getting their child to understand and to receive Jesus, and then have him be the head of the house. Takes a lot of talent to do that, but it's possible. I've seen it happen. I don't know how many young women that I know that had an encounter with a guy, and then the guy's gone, they're pregnant and have a kid, and they're left to raise this child. I find that when they have done that, God honors that and brings blessing. So understand, for the simple definition, a blessing is to empower to prosper. Empower to prosper. Now follow with me. In the Hebrew language, the verb bless is baruch. One of the primary meanings of the word is to empower to prosper. Now, a good definition then of cursing would be to disempower from prospering. Disempower. In other words, take that away from them. Now, in North America culture, we primarily think of prosperity in terms of money, do we not? That's unfortunate, but it just is. However, economic prosperity is not all this world entails. True success, to be able to prosper, to thrive, to succeed, or to do well, would be better defined, the verb to prosper, in those terms. But here's the thought. In the Hebrew language, this word primarily means to have a pleasant, fulfilling journey. Doesn't that change things? In other words, it's not something that happens in the pinnacle of that because I have achieved or made my first million. That is not what's being said. The journey that we're on is to prosper during the course of this journey. Now, in the Hebrew language, the word primarily means to have a pleasant, fulfilling journey. But now, to prosper would mean to have a pleasant journey through your life. So in combining the definitions, to bless, baruch, would mean to empower the one being blessed to thrive, succeed, do well, and to have a pleasant, fulfilling journey through life. Do you know anybody like that? Do you know anybody like that? On the other hand, to curse would mean to disempower or disable the one being cursed from thriving, succeeding, or having a pleasant, fulfilling journey through life. Is that what we see in the inner city? Absolutely. Do we see it a lot? Absolutely. Do we understand how that happens? There was a young man in Chicago that I saw an interview with. He's only 20, I think he's 26 years old, and his dream is to have a house full of young men that he can mentor, literally a house full of young men. And he's been very successful. How is he mentoring all of these young men who have no father? And most of them are orphans, and they had no place to go, living on the street. And he brought them in, and he brought them in there from, some of them are 6, 7 years old, some of them are in their teens. But what is he doing? He's giving them Jesus, and he's growing them by blessing them and having a conversation with him about their journey through life. Now, here's one that I think is kind of in blue water, blessing, or hydrochloric acid, cursing. A great picture of blessing and cursing comes when we think about our flowering plants. If we care for them properly, water with the correct nutrients added in the right amounts will cause the plants to flourish and be beautiful. How many would agree with that? Right now, I don't know about even having water to do that around our area, but that's what it is. But instead, if we fed them hydrochloric acid, how would they respond? Instead of thriving and opening up their pores and craving for more, the plants would close their little pores and attempt to repel as much as the acid as possible. This example is a good picture of the power of blessing and the power of cursing. In other words, it would destroy, cursing destroys, blessing makes it thrive. Now, I think it's interesting that many people don't understand what that looks like. Parents with their words, parents with their attitudes, parents with their actions possess the ability to bless or to curse the identity of their children. It's just the way it is. It's a reality. But now here's something interesting. Blessings like are pouring that nutrient-laden blue water over a child's inner being, while cursing is like pouring hydrochloric acid over the inner being. One empowers a child to prosper, the other cripples and disables. Now, blessing imparts God's message of identity and destiny, while cursing imparts Satan's message of the same. Now, this will crack you up. But anyway, it's an illustration. Just so you know, this is an illustration. Joshua and the hamburger. Joshua and the hamburger. You thought I was going to be talking about something else, but I'm talking about Joshua, little guy, and a hamburger. Listen carefully to this story. 4-year-old Joshua wanted a hamburger for lunch, but when he came to the table, it was much too big for him to hold, so his dad reached over and cut it in half. Joshua began to cry and said that his dad had ruined it. Several minutes of threats, even bribery, nothing would get Joshua to eat the burger. Realizing this was a power struggle, and the dad prayed and asked God for wisdom. God had told him to repent to his son and ask him for forgiveness for moving into the boy's space and not asking if he wanted help first. The dad immediately argued back with God and said he was in the right and he was the dad. But God reminded him that it wasn't about the burger, but it was about valuing his son and communicating with him about the situation. The father then told his son he was sorry and asked his forgiveness, to which his son immediately responded that he would forgive his dad. Then the dad offered to buy another hamburger for the boy, but with the identity problem resolved, Joshua happily ate the hamburger that he had. Think about that for a minute. This is kind of how the world looks to a lot of people, that it's my way or the highway. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. It's my understanding of the situation so that the communication and the value system can be instilled in little people so that they might be able to receive a blessing from that. Now, it's funny, this term, and I'll use the term, and we're going to talk about a lot of stories here in the next few minutes. We're going to talk about stories that I believe that actually impact how we look at the bigger picture. For lack of knowledge, my people perish. Many times when parents are attempting to motivate their children or to stimulate them to excellence, without realizing it, they're actually communicating the message to the son or daughter that no matter what level of achievement or accomplishment that they might attain, the child is still not a success in the sight of their parents. This is very true. I saw that as a youth leader in some of the young men that were growing up in the church here at the Lighthouse back in the day. And it was funny, one guy who was a leader in the church, who was I guess you could call him a pillar, had a son who was a pretty talented kid and grew pretty fast, so he was pretty tall. And so he aspired to play some basketball. And the dad tried to live his dream through his son. Well, guess what? That's not how it works. You cannot do that and expect good things to take place. And what ended up happening is this young man became an alcoholic because he could never achieve or could never live up to what his parent thought he could do. Now, there are sometimes God given on the inside of every one of us that longs to hear the words, something like this: son or honey, I'm so proud of you, from your dad and from your mom. I have to agree. So hard to do the right thing at the right time at the right moment. It's so hard, and we don't know what to do, and we don't know how to do that. We really don't, and I'm telling you. So let me go on. However, because of the lack of such from their own parents, many parents have never learned to allow their children to succeed in their sight and express it to them in such a way that they know that they're being affirmed or they're being lifted up or they're being, praised, which is a big deal. Sandy's father was one that I thought was really this is a good story. It says, Sandy could never get good enough grades for her father, so she just gave up and didn't try anymore. Blessing meant to impart God's image of identity and destiny into a life or into your life. When Satan's image or identity and destiny is delivered, threefold scheme almost always is set in motion. Let me follow with me now. This was mentioned earlier, but it's worth repeating. Number one, through the cursing of identity, Satan hopes to do this. Listen to what he said. Distort or replace entirely your image of who God has called you to be. In other words, take you down a different path. Remember the path that God has for us. He's already set up. It's real, and we're going through it one time, one thing at a time. And before I get too far, I want to tell you a story about my son. Now, number two, so distort or replace entirely the image of God has called you to be. Now, number two, drive you out of your place of habitation, the place of protection, and the residence which is yours. That's through family, marriage, church, employment, home, city, country. Chase you away from that where you're secure and where you have the best chance of growth. It's interesting that the enemy knows how to do that very, very well. The schemes that he has are amazing. And then the other thing in number three is steal your inheritance, that which God has meant to be an inheritance or heritage to you. Your finances, your children, your ministry, your pension, your relationships, all of those things are the things that the enemy tries to do to create an atmosphere in which you lose. Now, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about, why the role of the parent is so important. This happened to us. It happened to my wife and I. One of the things that my son always aspired to do was to play basketball. Now, in playing basketball, it's a very competitive sport, skill level sport, and his position was guard. And he liked the shooting guard. He didn't like the point guard. He liked the shooting guard, which is your off guard. Those of you who don't know basketball, bear with me for a moment. Well, during his 8th grade year, he was everything at the little school that we were at in Bella Vista, California. He went to Foothill, which was the next step, I should say, and he went to try out for the team. And he made it all the way through until the last day, and he came out to the van when I was picking him up after practice, and he was devastated. He just wouldn't stop sobbing. And I said, what's going on? And he says, I got cut. Now, you have to know my son. Life as we know it just ended. I mean, it was over. And all I could do was weep with him. All I could do was cry. And the thing that was so hard, there was nothing that we could say. There was nothing that Edry could say. There's nothing my wife could say as we were picking him up and on the way home about what that looked like. And the reason why it was so bad was that his cousin, the one that he grew up with, he made the team. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure why that was, but I think it was because he was a couple inches taller. But anyway, to make a long story short, he was devastated. And from that time forward, all the way through high school, he tried out for teams, got on teams, couldn't, and never, the team, we finally moved to another district, and he got on the team there. Coach wouldn't play him. Another long story. And all the way through high school, it was a chore to get him to do his school. He just felt devastated. He couldn't do anything. And so this kid did something that I'd never seen before. He would spend literally hours shooting the ball. And that's all he did. He shot the ball, shot the ball, shot the ball. And so at 18 and a half years old, he was shooting the ball and playing in the city league, and got quite a name for himself because he became incredibly good at what he was doing. And came home after all of these hours, and I told him it didn't matter whether he played or not or whatever. I sent him to John Wooden's School of Basketball seminar at UCLA on his 18th birthday. My dad paid for him to go down and do that. Saying all of that to say this, I never told him that he couldn't, but I told him that he could do whatever he thought he could do. I said, if you put your mind to it, you can do anything. And lo and behold, I get a phone call one night. I think I've told this story once before. I got a phone call from a coach from Simpson College in Northern California. And he called and he said, Dad, I want to bring Coach, I can't even remember his name now, to the house. And I said, okay, what's going on? And he came and he said, Coach sat in my front room and he said, I want to take your son to Canada and I want to build a team around him. What? Yeah, out of the clear blue, he said, I'm going to give him full ride scholarship, 4 years. His education is paid for. I want him to go. But what was really great is it was a Christian college, and it was so strict that the girls and the guys couldn't even hold hands on campus. It was awesome. It was a parent's dream. Absolutely lovely. And the thing is, though, after he started playing up there, and I got to go and watch him play and see how he had progressed and how good he was, is that he was number 2 in the entire country of Canada at three-point line, and which back then was what they call the international line, which is deeper than the one in the U.S. And anyway, he flourished and did amazing things where coaches that were up there wanted him to transfer to their school. But the thing that was great, God had him exactly where he needed to be in a Christian school, taking Bible and doing all those things because I believe we kept telling him that he could do whatever he wanted to do. And he believed it. And then it turned out to be a godsend for us. So that's why I say that it's so important for us to understand how the role of a parent is so important to make sure that what we see happening in the lives of our kids or the lives of people that we are investing in are being blessed. You need to bless them. Let's go on to the next one. The role of the parents in regards to this. Whether we realize it or not, parents hold a powerful keys to the future of lives of their children through blessing and through cursing. Through one, parents can literally empower their children to prosper and thrive in their marriage, in their family relationships, in their businesses, in their ministry, in their health, in their finances, by blessing your child. This is what's missing in the United States right now. There's 28% of the young men that are in the United States today have no father, 28%. And I think it's a lot higher now than it even was in 2020 before the pandemic. And it's interesting to me is that everybody knows that, but no one's trying to do anything to fix that. It's really scary, except for a few groups that are out there. There's a couple of great institutions that are trying to promote and grow kids into young men and young adults through mentoring, but giving them hope instead of giving them a curse. Now, this again is the fact that the blessing is God's ordained method of imparting identity to an individual and destiny to individuals. Now, unfortunately, many of our parents failed to have the knowledge of their job description before they become parents. That's where the trouble lies. Young men are not being taught how to impart that to others because they didn't get it when they were young. This is why the mentoring programs are so important and so vital to the growth of, especially of inner city kids and kids of color, so that they can have what they need, be equipped, and be able to show that to someone else. Now, a lot of people poo-poo this, but the fact is that you cannot minimize how important this is. Now, as a result, many of us received the devil's message by default through most of our growing up years, that you'll never were quite good enough. I remember the one thing that I did for my kids, that I paid them money for their grades. I know that's horrible, but I did it anyway. If they got an A, they got money. If they got a B, they got less money. They get a C, they get less money. Get a D, as my son would say, D's get degrees. He found that out in college. But my point that I'm saying is that is not how we did that. And let me tell you what, every time we get a progress report, every time we do it, we would encourage them to press harder because they knew that there was a cash out at the end of the deal. Now, I know that's horrible, but that's kind of how I did things. But anyway, now, in the ancient Hebrew culture of the Bible, there are 7 essential times when God intended to impart a powerful message of identity and destiny into the lives of each person. But in the Bible times, no one had any knowledge, didn't have to have any knowledge of the need of bless or to give out God's message at the appropriate times, because God did that. That's part of what he did. Now, God had a strategical place, a strategy in place with the culture, the ceremonies, the customs, the habits, and the other mechanisms to ensure that the lives were permeated with this message of identity of who you were and of destiny, where you were going. Parents could not do it wrong. This is why, now follow with me for a minute, what's happened in the United States. Critical race theory is destroying the nuclear family, and it's doing it on purpose. This has been set in place a long time ago. They're not hiding it anymore, folks. They're not hiding it anymore. I just saw a statistic today that the Seattle Teachers Union in Seattle has declared on the first day of school a strike. Why? Because the teachers want more money. They make $131,000 a year. Now, don't get me wrong. They deserve every dime of it if they're a good teacher. But the fact is that they're doing this because they're selfish, and that these kids have already had a really hard time, and this is all about money, and it's all about critical race theory, because that's what they teach in Seattle, Washington. And now, why am I saying that? Is because it destroys the individual, because it curses them. It's not good if you're a certain color, if you're a certain this or a certain that, or certain gender, or certain that. All of those things are to put down, not to lift up. If you'll notice that in the charter schools, which are all put around and wrapped around in a situation where it is uplifting and they're encouraged to learn, and when they learn, they're rewarded for that. This is the difference between what happens when you go into an educational system that is doing it for the right reason, and the educational system is doing it for the wrong reason. We're not out here to make teachers rich. We're out to help teachers become good teachers. And that's why that's why they have tenure. Then you can't fire them, no matter how bad they are. They never have to go back to do any other schooling or whatever. They do that in some places, but not always the case. What am I saying? Is that the enemy is the devil, the demonic forces, the evil things that are going on in our country is destroying the family from the inside out. Once they get them in school, they indoctrinate, and etc. This is not the way God had it planned. If you will look at our original documents from the time that the United States was created, where did the kids go to school? In the church. What did they use as the main textbook? It was called the Bible. And the funny thing is that it was just fine for a long, long time until we got the National Education Association. And that's where things went south in a hurry. Now, you know what? If they want to bloop me off here, I don't really give a rip. My point that I'm making is that the enemy knows how to destroy. That's the only thing he knows how to do. And that's exactly what's happening in the United States today. Follow with me now. Parents couldn't do it wrong in the beginning because God was reinforcing it all the way through Scripture, all the way through the Old Testament. Everything that you read was about training up your child. That's why when we read that in Scripture, train up your child in the way they should go, so when they are old, they will what? Not depart from there. Now, however, listen to this. However, modern day, over the last 150 years or so, the devil has systematically ripped out of American culture every ceremony, every custom, every habit, and protective mechanism that God had established to ensure our being blessed. What was the first thing that happened in the 60s? Took prayer out of school. What was the next thing that we do? Oh, it's optional to do the Pledge of Allegiance. What do we see happening today? Is that civics has been removed. It is not important to know that. I thank God my son and my daughter went through a school where they had to learn the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and had to recite it, had to memorize it. You know what? Didn't hurt them at all. And the funny thing is that, boy, they know the difference between right and wrong, even today. So these are things that we need to understand. Now, as a result, if parents today would just adhere to in our present culture, by default, they will miss imparting God's message of identity and destiny into the lives of the children. This is hugely important. Now, it doesn't seem that the culture of Christian people in the church today are really very different from those outside the church. In other words, we know that. But I do know this, the homeschool kids are absolutely head and shoulders above any public school kid. I don't care who they are. And it's amazing to see how the charter school kids are scoring on all of these different tests because they're doing so well, because they're imparting encouragement in them. And especially if it's church, if it's Christian-based, and they're imparting amazing things into them, and they're doing far above and beyond we could even ask or think. Now, many Christians believe that if they pray for their children, take them to church and put them in Christian school, teach them the Bible, make sure they have Christian friends, love them, and properly discipline them, they will grow up to be godly Christian adults. Although all these activities are good, none of them actually delivers God's message of identity and destiny when they most are needed. It's true. It's, you know, I don't understand why my kid, I sent him off to college and he came back an atheist. Well, that's because that's what they teach. We need to be very careful to make sure that we are not only protecting our children, but making sure that what their input is actually helping them. Now, as a result, many broken-hearted parents weeping over the devastation that occurred from their teens, the children in their teens, and the children, young adults, because they kind of do their own thing. For lack of knowledge, my people perish, he says. The good news is that Jesus has come to the earth as Redeemer to restore to your life and bring yourself back into freedom through a vertical, not horizontal, but a vertical connection with God into the heart of the people and the heart of the children that takes the darkness out of them. Now, I don't like to jump into something that I can't finish, especially as negative as this is. Cursing binds, blessings loosens. Cursing binds, in other words, cripples them. Blessings loosen, in other words, sets them free. Now, We need to understand that when we start to have things happen in our children's life, there's a reason for that. One of the things that I was known for in my county, in Shasta County, and one thing they did not want is Pastor Mark to show up at school board meetings. They did not want me to show up at supervisory meetings because I always caused problems. My life was threatened many times because I would not let them teach and show full graphic, pornographic pictures of STDs to my kids when they would go to what they called sex education classes. And they wondered why I was having a problem. And I said, the only thing that they're going to do is they're going to hear it from me, not from you. You're not going to tell my kid, or not going to show them how to put a condom on them. I'm just not going to happen. Those are things that won't happen. And the rubber met the road when two of my boys were sent from the high school 16 blocks to Planned Parenthood to get all the brochures and all the other stuff and paraphernalia that they gave them, because I thought that would be funny. And then they were sent away from the school while they were supposed to be in their custody. They walked by themselves all the way down to Planned Parenthood and all the way back, and I found out about it. And when I went to the principal and they could not give me a good excuse of why that happened, I threatened them, and not only threatened them, but I had called a couple of different people, and I said, I'm going to need an attorney because I'm going to sue these people if they don't change their ways. And, I made the papers, I got death threats, I got, you name it, it happened. And everybody knew Tony and Andrea Dornbusch. If you don't believe me, ask them. They were excused from any of the education that I deemed that was inappropriate, along with any of the kids that were in our church. They were just automatically, how can I say, set free from listening to this indoctrination. But the fact that what I'm trying to say is that you need to be actively involved in what your kids are seeing and doing if they're going to public school. If you have grandkids, you need to do the same thing. And let me tell you what, and it doesn't matter where it is. And if you're in a red district or you're in a blue district, you need to make sure that you know what's going on in your schools. Because even here in Ventura School District, I called because they were reciting, you cannot recite anything out of the Bible, but they were reciting prayers out of the Quran, in which I told them that if that didn't stop, that there was going to be a lovely lawsuit in their case as well. And it was in the elementary side, or what I call junior high side of the school district in Ventura itself. I don't know about you, but you know what? That really kind of takes me to the edge. And you got to know, Pastor Mark, when I say something, I mean what I say, and I will do what I say, and it just happens that way. So these are things that we need to go, and we will start on this next week. And what we're going to talk about is cursing binds, blessings loosen. So I hope that this has helped some of you today, and we'll be talking about that. And then we're going to be going on to God's blessing through cultural tradition. Yeah, believe it or not, there is such a thing. And we will do that coming up this next week. That's all I've got for tonight, but we'll be back next week with more as we talk about ancient past. God has already set in motion certain things, and He will bring them to pass, and I will give you anecdotes and stories that go along with it. And there is so much that I could add to this, and I just can't even get started right now. So next week I will. So God bless, and I hope that you have a great week, and stay cool if you can. If you can't, do something that is cool. I would recommend a iced sugar-free vanilla latte that I've had for the last 3 days that the girls have made for me at Lovewell Tea and Coffee. Ask for that. Say, Pastor Mark says it's pretty good. It is. Believe me. Tell them you want it extra sweet, by the way, just so you know. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord bless you, and may His light shine upon you everywhere that you go. Do something about giving a blessing out. It's running a little bit low on most people's spectrum. Bless them. May the Lord bless you and keep you in Jesus' name. See you next week from Lighthouse Living Room. Pastor Mark signing off for today.